This is the December 6th, 2022 meeting of the Finance Committee. May I have a roll call, please?
Yes. Committee members Gutierrez and Harmon are not present. Committee member Rouse? Here. And Committee Chair Friedman?
Here. We do have a quorum, so we'll get on to the business. So the first item is public comment, and this is for any item not on today's agenda but under the purview of the Finance Committee. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak to general public comment? Not seeing any in the room. Are there any online? Please raise your hand in the app.
Chair Friedman, there are no hands raised online.
I will close general public comment and move on to our item for today, which is the proposed State Street outdoor business facility charge, and I will turn that over to Mr. Bossy.
Good afternoon, Chair Friedman, Mayor Rouse, Brian Bossy. I'm the downtown team manager for the City of Santa Barbara's Public Works Department, and let's just get right into it. We have for you today, for your consideration, a couple of options for proposed charges for the State Street outdoor business facilities. The recommendation before you today is that the Finance Committee consider and recommend an outdoor business facility charge for use of the public right-of-way on the State Street Promenade, including the 400 and 1300 blocks of State Street, for City Council consideration. We would then follow up, obviously, by going to City Council at a future date. As far as background, we have been at this interim operations for quite some time. The ad hoc subcommittee and city staff have heard from businesses and the community the need to charge for commercial activities on State Street. And now back on September 20th, Ms. Sarah Clark, who I'm sorry I should have introduced, Sarah Clark, Downtown Plaza and Parking Manager, is here with me today. We presented to the entire City Council a number of items concerning the interim operations on State Street. At that time, amongst the many recommendations and decisions by City Council, they directed city staff to develop and present rate options to the Finance Committee. And that's why we're here today. So, big picture, with developing proposed charges for this these outdoor spaces, we wanted to keep the process simple in an effort to encourage continued participation by all the businesses and possibly more businesses to keep the street activated. We also wanted to keep the process simple due to limited city resources regarding setting up billing, things like that. We wanted to keep it simple, so there is some selfishness in there as well. Our cost structure and the resultant revenues, we were told, to have them cover maintenance and operation costs associated with the interim operations on State Street. So, noting that we're backing into a cost, city staff reviewed a number of options. Some of them, there were many, and there are many ways you can do this. Some of them included developing a charge based on tax returns of the individual businesses. Another option was a charge based on location, so vary by block, depending on what block your business is located. Another option was to charge based on the type of business that you had, whether you're a restaurant, a brewery, a stationery store, a coffee house, or a bar, and how that would operate. So getting into the various structures and revenues that come from those rate structures, the current maintenance and operational costs for this fiscal year, FY23, we estimate at about $600,000. We estimate that those are going to go up in fiscal year 2024. Our estimate at this time, and obviously as we get into the budget season, we'll be able to narrow this down a little bit, but we estimate it's about $675,000. And again, the revenue proposed from these rate structures would go to cover the entire cost of the promenade maintenance and operations. So how did we back into this number of $675,000 to cover those costs? First, we have approximately 9,500 square feet of frontage space being used, frontage space being just that in front of your business. We have an additional about 4,500 square feet of space being used beyond that frontage. So when you expand out one business down, two business down, et cetera. We've got about 4,500 square feet of that. Knowing that proposing a charge is going to probably have some folks either pull up stakes completely or possibly reduce the amount of space that they are currently occupying, we estimate this to be about 25% rate of attrition. So with those, you factor that in, we have about 7,100 square feet of frontage and about almost 3,400 square feet of additional space beyond your frontage. So the first rate structure option, you have seen this before. This was proposed to you at the September 20th meeting. This would be a monthly charge for commercial activity in the public right-of-way. It would be a charge on a per square foot basis. And again, we are talking only the 400 through the 1300 block of State Street. This does not include any of the parklets off of State Street or throughout the city. This is solely to do with State Street. This would be a graduated rate where your frontage would be charged at a rate of $5 per square foot. We estimate about $427, not quite $428,000 per year just on that initial frontage. The graduated component moving up as you expand, so going from that 100% up to the 200% beyond your initial square footage, that you'd be charged $7.50 a square foot. And if you went above 200% of your space, you would be charged $10 per square foot. We estimate those, between those two, you generate another about $304,000. So combined, for that uniform charge, we estimate about $731,000 per year. So that's the first of two proposals before you today for you to consider. So again, uniform charge across the board, regardless of what your structure looks like, $731,000. The second rate structure option is variable by design. Similar to the previous rate structure option, it's a monthly charge for commercial activity in the right-of-way. It would be on a per square foot basis. Now, the key difference here is the variable by design allows the businesses to essentially decide the rate they would be paying by what type of structure they would implement out in front of their business. The objective here is to incentivize portability, which helps with cleaning and keeping the space clean for everybody. And it's generally just a lower impact outdoor business facility. So depending on what type of business you have, how much revenue you're generating out there, how successful this program is for you, you may want to go all in, provide a roof, a platform, the whole deal, or you may already have a roof or a platform. If it's not much of a generator, but you do want to have something out there, you can go on the opposite end and scale down. And I'm going to go through some of the options or how these are structured. So this particular variable by design, we estimate revenues at approximately $650,000. It is a graduated rate similar to the uniform charge. So the variable by design option, the first and highest rate is your standard rate. And this is for facilities that are not portable, they have a platform, and they also have a roof. This is an example of such a structure. This is actually Arigato on the 1200 block of State. So this structure, you would be paying similar to the uniform, $5 per square foot up to 100%, $750, 100 to 200% beyond your space, $10 per square foot if you go above 200%. So again, variable by design, standard rate, not portable, with a roof and a platform. The next variable by design option is for a outdoor business facility with no roof. So you would have a platform that is not portable, but you would not have a roof attached to that. The proposed rate would be $4.50 per square foot up to 100%, then $6.75, and then moving up to $9 per square foot if you go above 200%. The next rate structure option is a rate for a portable facility. So that's a platform with no roof that is portable. We are not currently aware of any facilities out on State Street that have this. We've been told Some are looking at that, but we are not aware of any of them, and so therefore we don't have a photo. But the rate proposed for this would be $4 a square foot for your frontage, then up to $6, and finally $8 if you go above 200%. Lastly, the last category for variable by design is for the rate for on-grade. So this is a portable facility, there's no platform, and there's no roof. The example here is Night Lizard, which recently just converted they did have a platform and railing, but they converted to a on-grade portable design. The rate for this type of facility would be $3 per square foot to start with, $4.50, and then $6 per square foot. Now, additional needs that we're working on that would accompany this charge would be an outdoor business facility license agreement. This would be modeled after, or is being modeled after, our outdoor dining license agreement. We're currently working on that. The difference, at least one key difference is we're proposing for the outdoor business facility license agreement a month-to-month agreement. Again, allowing flexibility for the various businesses out there. There will be insurance requirements. We'll also require a site plan that specifies ADA and how they're meeting ADA requirements. As part of that process, we would roll this out. We'd have to review that license agreement submittal. We'd need to go out on site and check the facility out. And then we'd approve that submittal, and they'd be in the program, and thus a rate would start to be charged. Getting back to why we're here today, there's your recommendation before you, is that you consider and recommend an outdoor business facility charge for use of the public right-of-way on State Street from the 400 to the 1300 blocks for City Council consideration. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Great, thank you, Mr. Bossi. So at this point, I will open up to questions from my colleagues. Member Harmon?
Thank you, Chair Friedman. Thank you so much. I just have 4 or 5 questions. Thank you for indulging me. So first, I guess in trying to, let me go get the slide. On slide, well, I don't know what slide it is, but my question really essentially is, we have the cost to operate and maintain the street in 2022 and 2023, I think you had, but do we have an understanding of what it cost to operate the street before it was closed to vehicular traffic? And that difference between what it cost before and what it costs now, is that what the X that we're searching for? Or are we asking that these operators pay for the entire cost, including that cost that was already being paid prior to the closure to vehicles, if that makes any sense?
Committee Member Harmon, that's a great question. So the FY23 figure is approximately $600,000. And keep in mind that we're still figuring this out. We're coming together with the janitorial services, what really is needed out there. And so all of these figures, are subject to change. So with that, the $600,000, roughly $600,000 for FY23 and then the $675,000 for next year, about $200,000 is what would be required pre-promenade, sidewalks,
pre-promenade,
things like,
okay.
yes, about $200,000 of that $600,000 to $675,000.
Thank you, that's extremely helpful. So did we consider that in the interest of, sorry, should I? No, please.
My bad. I read the chart wrong. So the 600 is the entire cost with the closing of the street. There's an additional 200 that goes for the sidewalks that was pre-street closure. That's not included. I'm sorry.
Okay, no, thank you. That's very helpful. I really appreciate that. Okay. And then, so my next question is sort of similarly complicated, so bear with me. We're essentially saying by asking through this rent program to reach that 600, 675, that the operators that have a parklet should pay the entire cost of the closure. But isn't there an argument that there are benefits that are enjoyed by restaurants, other operators that don't have parklets? Like, is our position through this program essentially that the parklets are the full reason that the 600, 675 is paid, and therefore they should bear 100% of the cost needed to recoup? And I guess what I'm getting at here is I'm just sort of wondering if it's fair that no one else has to pay to recoup any of these costs and the parklets bear the entire burden. And maybe the answer is yes, but I'm just wondering if you guys thought about that and how you sort of circled that square.
Another great question, and not too complicated. So the direction we were given by the ad hoc subcommittee, and my understanding from our council meeting at the 20th, was to go out and here's the dollar figure we presented and fill that void. So that's what we went forward with. So essentially, yes, you are correct. Through this process that these various rates, that entire charge would be basically pushed off to the folks who have outdoor business facilities. They would be paying the entirety. So, no, the person walking by, a pedestrian, they don't factor into this, or other businesses that do not have a facility, just the ones that are out there conducting commercial activity in the right of way.
And I think you're spot on that was the direction, by the way. I've just, in seeing it now, have some concerns there.
Ms. Bjork, if you'd like, I see you coming up to elaborate.
Committee member Harmon, Finance Committee. At least my mic was off. So I wanted to add a little bit to your question, because Mr. Bossi answered the question you asked, but the question that wasn't asked that I think is also important is that all of the businesses on State Street pay into the Parking Business Improvement Assessment. And so they are also contributing to upkeep and maintenance of State Street. They're just doing so in a different function, and that is through their PBIA assessment. So a lot of that money has been used in the past for the general maintenance of State Street. So and then I think a further question that you may want to follow up with staff on is, to what extent are the cost drivers solely driven by the restaurants? For example, a good portion of that cost is to hire somebody to ensure ADA compliance. That is solely a benefit of the restaurants. Others on the promenade do not benefit from it. So I just wanted to add a little more clarification there.
Thank you. Okay, and then my next question, in the tiered charges for the storefront, expanded storefront, extra expanded storefront, is the theory behind an additional charge for more space that we are trying to incentivize smaller parklets? Is that why or is there some other reason for having an extra charge for 150% of your space or 200 that I'm not understanding? Is it purely about that being the desire?
Committee member Harmon, it's actually kind of the flip of that.
Okay.
The more space you use, the more then you pay. So we're not incentivizing smaller. We want activation on the street, obviously. We all want a lot of activity. So the more space you use beyond your frontage, the thought was that the more public right-of-way you use, you should pay more then.
Hold on. I'm sorry, can we go to the slide that details I may have just absolutely misunderstood this, so I'm trying to look at oh, there it is, thank you. Okay, so, but how does that incentivize more activation if you have to pay $6.75 per square foot for the extra space?
That's a good question. I think you could look at this a number of different ways.
Okay.
Yours is a very valid one. You could say that is disincentivizing. At the same time, these folks are using more public space that's currently not being paid for. So the larger your facility, the more you would pay. The more revenue you're generating at the same time, significantly more as you add on to your space. A lot of these
Yeah.
facilities have a 20-foot frontage, and so they want to bump out significantly. So the thought being more space, higher the cost.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I will save my comments, I guess. Just my concern here is it seems like we're disincentivizing activation. But I appreciate that. That's helpful. And then my final question, in terms of the number, and I see we backed in for the costs, which makes sense to me as a sort of underlying theory to get to this number. Did we do any thinking, and again, bracketing the fact that this is exactly the direction you were giving, so I thank you for doing that, but have we given any thought to what relationship that square footage rent bears to the rent that's being paid inside? And I realize they are totally different things, but I'm curious to know if there's any thought about having any sort of relationship between what an operator might pay for their indoor square footage and the outdoor, or if, in your view, those are such totally separate categories that it's not at all a useful comparator.
Committee Member Harmon, we did look at that. And as you said, it varies. We have talked to commercial real estate entities. We've talked with businesses and what they pay for the inside. What we're proposing for the outside, and I know there are members who are restaurateurs here, is significantly more than what they're paying inside.
Sorry, just one quick final question. Then I'm done. So I recognize that we have these options, so this may not be the option that we go to, but on the variable by design option, I'm wondering about the timing here, because we just, if I understand correctly, we just had that date, or it's just coming up, that says you have to have your stormwater changes made to your parklet. Did we do any messaging around the fact that there is possibly a rental rate structure that would incentivize portability, and thus you might want to not invest in putting the stormwater in if you're going to change to go to this? I'm wondering if folks were aware that this might be coming down before they invested in putting in that stormwater system.
Committee Member Harmon, so we've been talking about a rate structure for many months, very much prior to the September 20th council date.
Yeah.
So folks are aware that a fee is coming, and I think the timing with it was the December 1st stormwater date.
Yeah.
It kind of just lumped in that way. That wasn't our intention, but folks had from September 20th on to do that. So to say it was a December 1st date, if you're out there doing it the day before, that's going to be a problem, and you might have some additional costs associated with that. So the costs associated with that varied. Some people went out and paid a lot of money. Others simplified and removed their platforms like Night Lizard. So it was all across the board. But my understanding, and from what we've been talking to, whether it's through the downtown organization's board meetings and other spaces, this fee is coming. And the date that council gave us was, it'd be nice to have this in by February 1st. I don't think that's going to happen. We've still got some work to do. There's a lot of discussion that needs to happen. The license agreement as well is part of this. So we want to package that all together, and when it eventually does roll out, we want to make it clean, concise, and easy for folks. So I think the timing of it was just unfortunate in that sense.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And if there are members of the public, there are speaker slips over on your left over there if you'd like to fill them out and hand them to the clerk over here on your right. Mr. Rouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of questions. You mentioned that the template for this licensing agreement was the old licensing agreement, and since I sat on this very dais and we did the first licensing agreement way back when, some of the same questions apply. When you license for rent, use of which is commonly use of the public right-of-way, so you have a use, possession issues that you have, because these rents are going to be substantial. Do those public rights-of-way become totally controllable by the lessee, or do they remain part of the public purview? In other words, the understanding back then, this might be a Dan Henschke question, was that, yes, you have seating outside, yes, you're paying a seat charge back then, but the public, they still remains public domain. So as we move out into the street, the question is even further highlighted. So for this rent that they are paying, do they actually have complete control and purview over those spaces? Or are they still part of the public domain and the public has rights to those spaces?
Mr. Henschke.
Chair, Committee Member Rouse. Why did you turn it off?
We can hear you anyway.
I've been accused of that before. It remains public, it remains city-controlled property. This is not a lease arrangement in a traditional sense. There is no possessory interest transferred. The payment that you make is really not rent per se. We use rent as a common vernacular for payments that you pay to use somebody else's property. This is a use charge for a license that we would be giving. The agreement itself is a license agreement. Short answer to your question, city retains all control. The proprietor has the use of that area for their business purposes, and they control the business use, for example. For example, they can exclude somebody who wants to squat in it, but it's still city property.
Okay, so that brings up the second set of questions, which are a little bit tweaky, but I anticipate these as we move into what I like to label as normalcy. I don't know what that even means anymore. But if we have the city property, which we still control, and yet there are things that are not in compliance with other agency laws, state laws, federal laws, county laws, and I'm talking about ABC, EHS laws, certainly Uniform Building Code, that kind of thing. And so we collect rent, we collect a license fee, I should say, thank you. But I'm still confused as if we are out of compliance in those things. I know we're enforcing ADA, but are we party to the use or misuse of that particular property because we collect a licensing fee, even if they're performing something that falls outside of the standard codes that we have today?
No.
Okay, so
We do not assume any of those liabilities or responsibilities. That's part of the license arrangement
Okay.
with the proprietor.
all right, very good. And then my last question is, so I was a little surprised we had this different tiered thing for roofs and non-roofs and whatnot. And this is a kind of more of a building department, public works thing, I think. But if we, for example, provide a license and a rate for a roofed project, but that roof project hasn't been engineered, inspected, or designed, and as anybody in the building trades will tell you, roofs are particularly dangerous items. Where do we stand on that? If we are actually by right, or what the proper terminology would be, allowing this use in this structure, and it's a public venue, that anybody in the public can sit in these things, but it isn't still what you would have to go through normally to put a roof over a structure of any kind. Where do we stand on that? That's why I'm a little concerned about the tier, including roofs, non-roofs.
The pricing structure has nothing to do with the liability transfer. Does the city have potential liability risk resulting from the program that you have? Yes, you do, just like you have liability risk with any program that the city puts on. What we have done with the ERETO and the EERO before that and the licensing agreement is done our best to shift that risk to the proprietor who's using the public property. So the charge that we're levying is purely an economic transaction. And the way we've looked at it as staff is, should a business proprietor be able to use public property free of charge to generate revenue for themselves, or should they, as part of the economic transaction, pay something back to the city for the use of the city property? That's an economic transaction. In terms of the liability, we have essentially, by contract and otherwise, shifted all of the responsibility for the liability risk resulting from the maintenance, installation, operation, repair, use of the facility to the owner of that facility. And that's what we've tried to do. If we get sued, are we both going to probably get into the litigation? Yes, because that's what plaintiffs' lawyers do. They name everybody. And then we, as a defendant, would seek to shift the risk to the business owner, and that's part of the program. So it has nothing to do with the amount you charge. It's just part of the program, the liability shift.
So, okay, you may have just answered my question. So if we say we're going to charge a different tier rate, a premium rate, if you have a roof, meaning basically we're saying you're having a roof, we acknowledge you have a roof, and then you know, the horrible thing happens. It's still the same situation where we're all going to get sued, and we know that.
Right.
But in terms of we're not participating in this illegal structure or this non-permitted structure by doing this licensing fee to that structure.
Correct. The licensing arrangement requires two things in addition to the payment of the fee. One is that you comply with applicable laws, and two is that you defend and indemnify the city from the fact that you put up the structure, you're operating it, you're maintaining it, it's yours. All we're doing is giving you the place to put it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great questions. I just have two questions. First, Mr. Boss, you referenced it, the February 1st date of when these would take effect, but what goes into that, and when is a more, have you looked at it when we think that it would take effect? Because you said February 1st is probably too soon, but do we have any estimate of when we think this program would be in effect?
Chair Friedman, months and months ago would be our desire, but we are working as fast as we can. And after we get through Finance Committee, whether that's now or in the future, we would then have to come back to council. And then there's, you know, we're going to have to open it up for people to submit these things, give them 30, 45 days. There's going to be a 30-day review period. Just with staff resources, we're going to work on it as fast as we can. Obviously, there's a desire from the folks out there, and the businesses included, to start paying a rate. We would like that too, to help offset our operational charges. So we're going to try as soon as we can. I would say if it's not February 1st, and I just real quick, there's another date, February 1st, and that's all the design requirements that the council approved back in September. So those, just for folks out there, that's a separate date. Mid to late spring. Again, as soon as we possibly can.
Just for a general sense for the public and for the business operators to understand, it's not February 1st, month, we'll get there, but just know that it's coming and that's the timeline. And it's adjustable, I understand that, but I just wanted to get that timeline
I would
out there.
hope that we could get this out at the latest April 1.
And then my second question, a lot of them were already asked and answered, is going into the rate structure option by design. We do have for the not portable platforms, and then the not portable but with a platform, no roof. Those, as I recall, and I just wanted to clarify, those types of structures are only for the existing ones that are there, or can new ones come in and apply for those? Because at the council we gave some direction on what new structures, if you don't have one there right now, what that means versus somebody who already has one. So if you could just clarify that, just because we're implementing this, say, what's the first one, standard rate, not portable, platform with a roof, doesn't mean that we can get 5 or 6 or 7 new ones that are not portable with a platform with a roof.
Chair Friedman, great question, great analysis. So back on September 20th, one of the things you decided was moving forward from that date on, they would be required to be portable. I believe also as part of that was no roofs. So what you see here is based on what's out there right now. It also provides guidance if you're hopefully going to have a business coming onto State Street, you can kind of pick what your design scenario is based on your business, what works for you, and implement it. But it would have to be portable, no roof. And then meet all the previous design
And-
requirements that
And
you
no,
had.
no platform, or with a platform, do we recall?
Platforms are acceptable as long as they are.
For new ones?
Yeah.
Portable. So it's portable with no roof. So that was what would come forward. So I just wanted to make it clear that even though we would potentially today, if we went down this road, for those with roofs that are not portable, we wouldn't be incentivizing new ones to come in because council already took that action not to have new ones come in like that. That would have a roof and be not portable.
If I'm understanding your
Sorry.
statement, yes.
Okay. Yeah, it's basically we're not having any, just because we're implementing that type of structure, we're not encouraging new ones that haven't been built yet to come in and apply for that. It's only, that specific one is only for those that are already existing.
Correct. And as we look at this too, you know, we are basing this on what is currently out there. Obviously, we hope, we've been at this 2.5 years, almost 3 years, I guess, with these outdoor business facilities. So kind of what you see out there is what you see out there. The people who have been there quite some time. We do know that State Street is very dynamic. We are hoping that even more people come to State Street and put out outdoor business facilities to activate different blocks.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bossi. So I'm now going to open it up to public comment. You will each have 3 minutes to speak. I'll start with those in the room. Those online, if you would like to speak, please raise your hand in the app. It is now, I will leave that open for the first 2 speakers. When they're done, then I will close any new speakers online, so that'll be about 5 minutes from now to raise your hand in the app. So I will start with Richard Yates. Come on up. Yeah, turn the mic on.
Supposed to be tech savvy, but I guess not that much. Can I have my 7 seconds back?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple on the
Okay.
flip side.
I'm so thrilled to have 3 minutes, by the way, because I tend to be a little verbose. Anyway, this is Richard Yates, excuse me, from Opal Restaurant and Bar. Dear council members of the Finance Committee, just a few considerations, some of which has been covered, but I sort of had to write this in advance, so I'm going to say some things we've maybe already talked about. Let me just say that most of us in our community, in the restaurants that have parklets, we want to pay the city rent. That's only fair. It's city property, and the city has been generous and helpful in letting us use these spaces rent-free up to now. The tricky question has been how to fairly calculate the cost. The proposed $5 is way more than our interior lease rates, as has been noted, and higher by an even greater amount than patio rent, which is generally half or lower than interior rates. With proposed rents so much higher than lease rates, it's clear the city isn't using them as a model, as we've discussed. But I do want to point out the effect on this would be the same. However, you're equivocating these two, we would still be getting a lot more money. So we do understand that the city wants to use parklet rental to recoup the promenade associated costs. What many of us don't understand, as we've discussed a bit, is why should our outdoor dining areas bear the entire cost of maintaining the 400 to 1,300 blocks of State Street? For the sake of argument, if we could agree that this might not be an entirely fair way to determine our rent, then what would be more fair? Accepting the city's premise that the basis on which to charge us rent is to recoup charges for maintaining State Street, wouldn't it be more fair to charge us proportionally rather than for the whole thing? Using a cost-benefit analysis, one approach would be to charge us just for the difference in costs for maintenance before the promenade and what's projected to be after. I think we've touched on that a bit. Also taking into account, another thing I don't think has been mentioned, on the benefit side, how much more has our area made after than before? Maybe we've already mitigated some of those costs. Another way to consider calculating rent proportionally to our footprint has been conceived by Robin Elander, and I will let her elaborate on that. But just a few facts to finish with. Restaurants nationwide average a 5% profit. Staffing shortages limit our business, how much we can take, and push up labor costs. With recession looming and perhaps a COVID comeback, outside dining, which saved us all last time, may be needed again. We know we're judged aesthetically by what currently is, but we intend to cooperate with the new guidelines so our aesthetics will match the cultural and economic revitalization brought by the promenade. But imposing damagingly high rental rates right now will cause more attrition than you project. Since the master plan will surely include outdoor dining, why discourage it while we are in transition to the new look of outdoor dining, and whatever it will be? It'll be one that will fit in comfortably with the look that Santa Barbara has always been famous for. In short, let's start by paying a reasonable amount in a reasonable time frame, but not structuring it in such a way to choke off this renaissance before it can reach its potential. Thank you.
Thank you. Right on time. I don't even need to give you those 7 seconds back. Jim Cannell, followed by Bob Stout, followed by Robin Elander. Those will be the in-room speakers, and then we will shift it over to online.
I want to start off by discussing the,
Is the mic on?
oh, sorry. Okay, thank you. I have a few questions, I have a few concerns. One is I'm against the parklets, so let's get that straight right off the top. I don't appreciate it. It's been damaging for my retail tenants, and it's been damaging for the surrounding properties that we own. One of the issues are the unintended consequences of the parklets. Nobody's discussed bathrooms and the fixture count. All my properties comply with fixture counts that are determined by the city based on the size and scale and scope of your restaurants. None of that is being calculated with the expansion of these parklets. So you are putting my properties in violation of the existing city ordinance because I can't comply with the amount of common area restrooms that are needed because none of the restaurants that have expanded in the street comply with the ordinance that is out there. So what you've done is you've created a burden to the property owner to have to monitor his bathrooms and his facilities and the traffic that it creates. It's a burden to the landlord. The other burden to the landlord is this. Nobody ever talks about liability if somebody was to get hurt in these parklets. There's no requirement in this license agreement with respect to insurance required by the merchant that expands on the street. What kind of liability insurance are you going to recommend? We have requirements of our tenants in our building under roof, but I can't mandate insurance requirements on a tenant that's not in my property, and my carrier won't do that. So I'm uninsured. I am uninsured. If any liability or any accident or anything happens, whether it be ADA, whether it be saying I'm in violation of the fixture count and the property is held liable, I'd have no recourse. So you're leaving the property owners out there in jeopardy. The other issue is that the budget is based on what's there. And what's there, they have an attrition rate of 25%. I will submit to you, none of my tenants will be allowed to expand beyond their storefronts. So tenants like Arigato Sushi that have expanded 300% are not going to have approval to expand in any one of my retail tenants' spaces because they've taken the ability for those retail spaces to have any identity on the street. And that's very important in the retail business. The other issue is that when you factor that in, the revenues that you're thinking about being able to collect, you will not be able to. And the other issue is that talking about rents on the parklets, yeah, everyone that expands on the street should pay more. If to do so puts the city in competition to the landlord in charging rents. If you're going to charge the same rents as I for my retail space, you're in competition. That is against the city charter.
Need you to wrap up, Mr. Cannell.
Thanks.
Thank you. Next up is Bob Stout. And I'm closing online any new hands to be raised. So whoever's online now, you get to speak.
Thank you, Chair Friedman and members, Ms. Harmon, Mr. Rouse. Let's see, I usually write down things and I don't use them anyway, so I'll just turn this over today. First off, thanks to everybody. There's so many devils in the detail issues here, and first off, I think thanks to council for on September 20th bringing this to finance. Maybe you were going to anyway, probably. I don't know how that works, but it's really important because there's a lot of ideas that were discussed with design, stormwater, and everything else, and you know, the financial part of it's really important to these businesses. First off, in the big picture, outdoor dining, you've heard it so many times, it's really, really important. It's, I mean, LA's considering a mask mandate indoors. Maybe they're going to do it, maybe they're not. COVID's not gone away. Older people love to be outside eating, and it's just popular, and it's wonderful. We are entering the winter season, so as you consider the finances on this, and I think I understand a lot of the numbers, a couple points. I think it's important to look at the overall number. I mean, I could give you a number what I think, not what my fellow restaurateurs and friends think, but I think something more akin to like $3 a square foot max would be more appropriate for a couple of reasons, not just because it's less money, but because I think it's more in line with what it's really going to cost, the difference between what it used to cost and what it does cost now. I know the DO, I was former president, I'm not speaking as a DO person, but I do remember the money we used to pay out for the entire State Street Plaza and everything was more akin to around 500. And so it just seems to me that it should be charged, the extra what the parklets actually additionally cost. I don't think there should be a rate structure by design. I think you should pay a flat amount. I think you should consider places like OP's, I think in the 1,000 or 900 block that are really the beacons in that street right now. And if you don't have those, a place like O'Malley's or something in the 500 block, they should have no problem paying for their 1,000 or their 20 by 10 foot square feet. But when you get into these vacant lots that we're trying to activate, I think you're going to disincentivize the activation if you prohibit those people or discourage those people from expanding. I think Mr. Cannell's right. You're going to see much greater than 25% depreciation or whatever you call that, because in the 400 block alone, there's 1,800 square feet of parklets. And that's roughly 15% right there. And I don't think many of those are going to be able to meet the stormwater. So you're going to have more than 25%. Finally, I would just say try to keep, Ventura pays $200 per business, I'm pretty sure. Our attorney can check that. I'm not positive. That's what I've heard per month. So I think that, if you average it out, $1,000 is quite high. I think something, like, $4,000 extra for a place like OP's. It's trying to activate that block. I'd stick to $250 or $3 a square foot, and I would not charge more for the extras. The landlords are going to decide on that, and if their neighbor doesn't want that, there's ways in place for places not to be so big. So thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Stout. And next up, Robin Elander.
Good afternoon, Mayor, City Council members, and city staff. As Executive Director of Downtown Santa Barbara, my role is to support, promote, and help create conditions for downtown businesses to thrive. I sent in a portion of this statement, so I'll just read a segment of it. To that end, I recently met with a number of downtown restaurant and bar owners that have outdoor dining facilities to review the Finance Community Staff Report. The feedback I received is what I'm sharing today. In summary, while businesses in most cases are willing to pay for the use of the outdoor dining space, they are concerned that paying the entirety of the cost to maintain the promenade is an excessive burden for them to take on all themselves. I tend to agree. Restaurants may make up to somewhere around 30% of the entirety of the promenade space, give or take some. Can't be certain exactly. For example, one way to look at it is if restaurants and bars with outdoor dining facilities represent 14,000 square feet of all of the outdoor space on the promenade, they should play close to that proportion of the overall space. Something like 30% of the entirety of the $675,000 in cost, plus any administrative cost to manage the outdoor dining program. Many businesses have shared that the previous sidewalk dining program, since it's also using public right-of-way, is a good model with fair prices that they have relied on and referenced. Several recommended it should be considered for this purpose as well. Thank you for your collective efforts to make careful recommendations that create consistent and reliable conditions for businesses to work with so that you and I in our entire community can help them thrive, not just get by. Some businesses said that they could potentially pay the $3 to $5 per square foot, but they would make little to no profit. Restaurateurs expressed that they are dealing with exorbitantly high housing prices for their workers and have had to increase wages and are dealing with high costs due to inflation. They also fear the onset of a recession and people tightening their pocketbooks. Lastly, thank you for all your efforts to create diverse, positive impacts for downtown on multiple fronts. It's certainly not an easy task to manage all of these different factors associated with decisions like these, and your leadership is appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Elander. Next, I will go to those online. Is there anybody online who's wishing to speak?
Chair Friedman, no hands are raised at this time.
Okay, so I will close public comment and now turn it over to my colleagues. See, Mayor Rouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So yeah, it seemed, as we go, and Ms. Elander referred to the former licensing fee, and I remember that being very, very controversial as well, and people complain about if they were either on State Street or one of the side streets and paying a licensing fee, the same per chairs, and it was a really convoluted system. So I'm pleased that we're talking about it per square foot. However, even though it seems evident that the percentage of the entire promenade being paid by just the restaurant square footage seems inherently unfair. However, State Street was closed for exactly one set of businesses, and that was for the restaurants who were shut down because they couldn't have indoor seating. The reason why all those blocks were closed down was to make it easier, to make traffic circulation more apparent, and to do what we did. We were I wasn't on council at the time, but the thought was that pandemic was going to be over by Labor Day or whatever it was, and now we are 3 years later, and we have still a closed State Street. We have basically the 3 years of boots on the ground experiment having been performed. And yet, outside of the restaurants and the parklets, there hasn't been improvement on State Street in terms of the business vitality and the action. So the question is not so much what proportion of the entire promenade is made up by restaurants paying licensing fees. The question would be, what is fair? Because why is State Street closed? Other than the fact that there are a lot of people who like the idea of a closed State Street. We have actual real properties and businesses and retail that don't all feel the same. And I don't know what the master plan is going to end up being. I have no idea what the consultants are going to say. But there's no other reason why we've closed the blocks we have outside of providing for relief for those businesses. It was a great move. I applaud this city for having done it. And now, as I've said many, many times, putting the genie back in the bottle is the real trick. What do we do? How do we make it fair? I remain a little nonplussed, even with the comforts of Mr. Henschke's comments about the amount of laws that are put in abeyance. Mr. Cannell mentioned the thing about the fixtures, which I think is part of the Uniform Building Code, something I've mentioned a number of times. There's a lot of things that need to be addressed. And a lot of these things were addressed, like I say, with the original ones, but as you expand beyond, as we codify the ability to expand beyond your natural storefront, a couple of things happen. Number one, you may or may not be covering up somebody else's retail space. And number two is, it's inherently unfair for the 500 block because they are pretty much all constrained to their own storefront because of just the fact that there are all parklets down there. They couldn't really expand beyond as much as they wanted to anyway. So why are we making different rules for different places at different times? And then we have other parts of the city as well that are looking in on this. I know we're talking about State Street, but as we go forward, we're going to have to come back to what we've always had for regulations, what we've had for approvals, what we've had for aesthetics. So I know we're talking about race today, but putting into some perspective on what's fair and what's not fair, and I can't define that, but I do know that there's a lot of people who are not participating in the Parkland program who find what we've done for the last 3 years inherently unfair, and I'm thinking about those folks too. I want to give them some voice as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Harmon.
Thank you, Chair Friedman. Well, I have the utmost respect for Mayor Rouse's perspective on the promenade, and I think brings up a lot of important points about how we want to move forward fundamentally with a sense of fairness. I do find myself just frankly kind of maybe at the totally opposite end of the spectrum on a lot of these points. That said, I'm not going to respond to all of them because I really just want to confine my own discussion today to the rate. And one area where we are in complete agreement, Mayor Rouse, is the idea that rent does need to be charged for these. So that is one thing I think we can all celebrate being in agreement on here. And I think also the point you made that the way that we have come to the rate that's being charged, I think you even said this, it is unfair to the parklets to bear the entire burden. Now, to staff, I think this is what we asked you to do, but I find myself really uncomfortable with seeing it in front of me and having that entire charge borne by the parklets when we are simultaneously asking these businesses to enliven the block itself. So to me, I almost feel like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth with a charge like this, because on the one hand, I'm encouraging this and saying, do this to energize and enliven State Street, and on the other hand, taking an action that, while again it is absolutely as directed, seems to me, as I look at it here, in some senses almost punitive and specifically meant to lead to attrition. So I'm really struggling to square that circle within my own mind here. And we had a bullet point here that noted that we anticipate, if we were to implement this rate structure, that there would be a 25% rate of attrition. And whether one thinks that number is low or not, to me, that's too much. I don't want attrition. I want energy. I want these parklets. So I'm struggling really with that. To me, that's a big red flag to me that these are going to go away. That's not my interest in implementing the rate structure, is to incentivize their removal. That's not what I want to do at all. I want to just figure out some fair but also meaningful way to recoup some of the costs that are clearly associated with these parklets. And I don't at all mean to imply that they don't lead to costs for the city. I think our city administrator was very clear and spot on, saying there are huge costs associated with it. So, I guess all that's to say, I'm really trying to find some place of balance here. And to me, I just don't feel that we've found that balance with the rate structure, either one, frankly, as proposed. So I have a couple of suggestions that I'd like to put to the committee to see if we can't find some more reasonable, in my opinion, or maybe a middle ground is a better way to put it, path forward. First, I would like to see, just as a general matter, I think $5 is too high. I don't want to see an attrition rate of 25%. I don't think that will be good for the street as it is, nor do I think that will be good as we move forward with the master planning process. I don't think that puts us on the right footing. If the street begins to lose energy, what does that mean for us as we begin to implement this huge transformative master plan? I don't think that's a good thing. So I would be much more supportive of a rent at, I think some of our public speakers said, well, of course, not everyone would be happy with $3. That is more in line, I think, with where I am heading. I'm interested to hear from our colleagues if there's support for that. So I do not support the tiered fees for increasing the charges for expanded space. While I understand the argument to do so, and understand the argument Mayor Rouse said that, in the 500 block they can't expand. Well, in the 500 block they also benefit from a much busier street. So I'm thinking about restaurants in the 900 block and the 1,000 block. Yes, of course they may have larger parklets, but they've got a much bigger lift to get business there. The 500 block has its own benefit from being a much busier block. So I think if you're thinking about fundamental fairness, fairness doesn't necessarily mean that the program is applied exactly the same way to everyone, no matter the context. Fairness, I think fundamental fairness means you have flexibility that responds to the specific circumstances so that everyone has an equal opportunity to thrive. To me, I think to charge more for a larger space, a higher fee for the 100 to 200%, simply is just not reflective of the reality that the larger parklets are in streets that are much less busy and have a much more difficult time attracting foot traffic. So I would like to get rid of that structure, though reasonable minds obviously can disagree. I also don't support the variable by design option. I understand why we put that forward, but I don't think we need to incentivize portability any more than we already have. It's not, we're not allowed to, it has to be portable moving forward, right? So it doesn't quite make sense to me. It seems to sort of like ex post facto punish, and that is a very strong word. I should have used a different one, but I think you all understand where I'm going with that. So I would like us to go with the other tier. And then finally, after all that, I was of the mind back in September that I wanted this in place as soon as humanly possible. And I think that I even sat up on the dais and said, not only is February 1st too late, so I have a little bit of mea culpa on that because I know for a fact I pushed on the speed. I'm wondering now, and I think that it might be a good idea, especially if we go with a higher number on the rental rate, to put it in place at the start of the busy season. If we go with a higher number and put it in place in February or March, when we know it's really sort of like it's the ebb of the tourist season, to me that just doesn't track. So I'm curious to know from my colleagues if there's any interest in saying we're giving you a long lead time, you've got quite a runway, and this will start to coincide with the busy season, whether that's a June 1st or a, whatever date that is. But I guess those are my thoughts for now, and thank you.
All right. Thank you. Well, I'm good. Everyone? Good with those comments. So it's tough. There's a lot of valid points that were made here on all sides, and it's a tough issue to try to bring a consensus here so we can get something to the full council, because it feels like deja vu. Like we might be 1 to 1 to 1, like we were on an item last time we were here. But where I look at it is, we do want to keep the vitality of State Street, and we want it to work with a lot of flexibility so that we can inform the decision-making process of the Master Planning Committee. So in the interest of time, where I think with this is that the council gave direction to encourage portability. That was a key in our new design guidelines. And I do have concerns with the risk that is associated with these larger structures. And if you look at the slides, one business converted, I think was slide 14, and another remained the same. And there are many issues with the larger structures in terms of liability to both the city, to the public at large, and the property owners. And to the extent that the $5 is high, it could be, or it is, but that's also a choice, because there are choices to modify your structure to go down to a lower tier. So if we focus everything, it's $5, well, the other tiers are lower, and any new business that comes in would be at if you went with the variable, would be at the 3 or the 4, depending on what they do. So where I think I'm supportive of the variable, because I think there is a competitive advantage to having the larger structures that are grandfathered in, but the variable rate structure allows for new businesses to be somewhat competitive as well, and also addresses part of our responsibility is how the city operates and maintains our public infrastructure. And portability, for a lot of reasons, for stormwater issues in particular, reducing liability of risk if something should happen, those are all things that we need to consider as policymakers. And I also think there is an aesthetics issue with some of the larger structures. When you're talking about one of the most historic streets in the western United States, in the blocks that we're talking about. And the master planning process is about another 1.5 years or so, but it's not as if when that's done that those structures are going to come down. Because just as we're grappling with, look how much we're grappling with trying to set a fee structure. And imagine all the recommendations that are going to come out of that and all the costs it's going to go into, whatever the recommendations are. Where do you start? Which ones do you choose? that in and of itself is going to have a huge cost in terms of dollars for implementing, but also in terms of the time it takes and where you start. So at that point, I could see us having this conversation is, like, say we start in the 500 block. Well, then some of these other structures that might be more inclined with coming with new design metrics later could be there for years until we get up to the larger areas, or it could not. So there's just a lot now that if we're struggling with this, that I see us struggling in the future that could really impact the visual aesthetics in particular of State Street. So with that being said, I think where I at is I'm supportive of at least getting a recommendation to the full council to consider, and I would be at this point supportive of the staff recommendation, but I wanted to speak to a couple of the points. One is addressing the fee date for when it would start. Since Mr. Bossi indicated that it's probably the spring, I think we can safely assume, and if we need to put a time in there that it wouldn't start before that, I'm open to it. But sometime around May, start it sometime around May. Because I think that's when it's gonna start anyways, if I'm understanding what Mr. Bossi said, by the time it goes to council and it comes in and you have all that. So I'd be open to somewhere around that. And if it would help us to get a recommendation out in terms of the expansion, I think Mr. Cannell raises some serious issues that haven't gotten discussed, is the bathrooms issue. And also the liability for property owners. I didn't realize you couldn't get insurance, but the bathrooms issue is a huge one because it might prevent, if one facility uses up all the restroom facilities in a property, it actually could have the detrimental effect of not being able to lease out another property next door to that relies on those same bathrooms. I think that is the case. And so then you're actually creating a vacancy right next to a place that you've just expanded. So you might have the expansion of a parklet to create some vitality, but you're gonna have a vacancy next door because there simply aren't the restrooms to accommodate a new business there. And I know Mr. Knoll, I've communicated on that in the past. So that's a concern I have, but I don't know how to address that. So I think in terms of the expansion, I would be open if we could get something out of here is for up to like the 100 to 200, you keep it. But anything over 200%, you're gonna pay like the $10 or $7.50. But that would be for like the 5, or whatever blocks it is. So I think it's convoluted, but basically where I would be is let's do the staff recommendation, and let's say if you're going over 200, then you would pay the extra fee. The staff recommendation of proposal 2, which is the variable thing, sorry. And that's where I'd start off, but again, I'm open to it because I see there's a lot to think about here. So who wants to come up? Member Harmon.
Well, Mr. Chair, I'm struggling to find anything to vote on. I mean, honestly, this convoluted is an understatement when it comes to this thing, and I just see too many inconsistencies. I'm really reminded of when and this was an old finance director, by the way, not the current one, brought up the idea, hey, we can collect money from people doing illegal vacation rentals. And we set a program in place that actually didn't have a legal existence or a basis to collect as revenue, and then we went on. Mr. Hinsky has made it clear that we really aren't doing anything illegal per se. However, there are certain things and inconsistencies with property owners and whatnot that I feel really uncomfortable codifying something that's going to be inconsistent with what the codes we have and what other people have had to go through to go into business. I've done 2 businesses in this town. I know them pretty well. And I'm also not going to go with the blanket assumption, anecdotal assumption that the rising tide floats all boats with, the restaurants have made things more alive, because I haven't seen the occupancies go up based on the fact that we have parklets in some areas and not in some others, and I've seen some places that were even restaurants go out of business. So, I don't know what the answer is, but I don't think we found the answer today.
Chair.
Member Harmon.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think I'm probably going to be outvoted here, which is totally fine, and I appreciate you including the provision that the implementation be delayed. I think that'll be really helpful for people. For me, I fundamentally just can't get around that connection between this proposed rent and what we estimate the attrition rate will be. I mean, that's really fundamentally what it comes down to for me. So I think you both have made great arguments, but I can't. I think the outcome is not one that would be positive for the street, and I don't think it's what people want to see. So with respect, I'll lose this one and vote no.
Well, there's nothing to vote on because we don't have a, at this point, one, we have to get to a council meeting, but I think if we were going to vote on something just to vote on something, I think that's actually, we wouldn't be doing our job to pass it to the full council to consider, because then whatever we vote on, it does carry some weight, even if it's struggling, and we can't even get close, because I don't see, well, I already said what I'm going to say. So I think at this point, unless you have any suggestions, Ms. Bjork, I think we're going to have to just pass this up to the full council to consider.
Chair Friedman, you can certainly pass it up to the full council to consider unless you had additional direction for staff that you wanted to give in 5 minutes today.
Well, what I'll do is I'll try a motion just to try it all. So is that we move forward with, I'll just say we'll move forward with the staff recommendation with the inclusion that it wouldn't be implemented before May 1st. Without? How about if I take out the May 1st? And by staff recommendation, I mean the variable by design option.
Chair Friedman, perhaps you could try asking whether your colleagues would like to forward this to council without a recommendation.
That was where I was going next. I was trying to get a recommendation, but not there. So do we have a motion to forward this to council without a recommendation?
So moved.
Is there a
Second.
second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And with that, we are done.